Welcome to the Special Report online show. I'm your Chief Washington correspondent, James Rosen, sitting in for our Chief Political Anchor and Executive Editor of Special Report, Bret Baier, who has pressing business across town. The truth is, he's written you off. He doesn't care about you. I do. I'm here. And so is our all-star panel. Charles Krauthammer, syndicated columnist, A.B. Stoddard, reporter extraordinaire, and George Will. Who's George Will? And so it's great to be with you guys, and thanks for sticking around for me and for our online viewers. So just to continue some of the conversation that you had with Bret Baier in the panel for Special Report, I wanted to play this soundbite from Ted Cruz talking about the upcoming Texas primary, which is a winner-take-all primary where all the delegates are up for grabs and only one person, one candidate will walk away with them. Let's play that soundbite from Ted Cruz.
Tonight, I'll sleep in my bed for the first time in a month. And then it will be back to the campaign trail in Texas and all across Super Tuesday.
Yeah, I'm leading in Ohio, I'm leading in Florida, but I'd like to really win in Texas. Wouldn't that be great? I love Texas. I love Texas. And I think now that he's exposed himself as a nasty person who lies a lot, I think he's going to go way, way down in Texas.
All right, so anybody willing to venture predictions, prognostications on what will happen in Texas? And just exactly how important is Texas in this process, George?
Well, Texas, if Cruz loses it, it's all important. If he wins it, he's apt to win it in a dusty way because they allocate these things. You have to have a certain threshold, win by congressional districts, 3 delegates per district. So you could get a sort of, as I say, dusty answer that isn't harmful or helpful. But at this point, when you're running out of days and places and people to stop Trump, a dusty day helps Trump.
Is it do or die for him, Texas, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, if he fails there, he's going to be looking at. I mean, he's out of a path. I've just been watching the evangelical vote for Trump in South Carolina and Nevada. South Carolina is probably more important and more representative than Nevada, but that was Cruz's path. And so without that, he was going to turn them out like no one else could, even in a general election. And if he doesn't have them, and they're going for Trump in spite of everything else that Cruz perceived to be liabilities Trump would have with evangelical voters, if he's getting routed by 14 points and 6 and 7 points, I don't see a path for Cruz. So if Cruz were to lose Texas, you say, you know, why are you in the race? Does he listen to people? Does he take phone calls from party stalwarts? Does he care? Does he bow to pressure? No. And I actually think he wants to hang around because I think he hopes that if Trump were the nominee and he lost, that Cruz could come back again in 4 years.
Charles, was Donald Trump correct when he said in that clip that we just played that Cruz has, quote, exposed himself as a nasty person who lies a lot?
Well, there's been a lot of that thrown around. There have been a lot of untruths told, but that's sort of par for the course. I think his problem is that he reacted in the worst possible way. He fired somebody last Friday, which is sort of an admission that this is a problem. His
communications director.
Right, and once you do that, sacrificial lamb, that doesn't look good. It dominated the news for that whole day, leading into the Nevada caucuses. So,
what was his option instead of firing Rick Tyler? Could he have suspended Rick Tyler for 2 weeks and then we'll talk about it until he comes back? Or
say we made a mistake, go on. I mean, and change the subject if you can. The minute you create a scapegoat, you fire somebody on your staff. That was the story of the day. It didn't have to be. And then, of course, the others, Rubio and Trump, piled on, which is what you would do if you were an opponent. So I think he's allowed himself to get rattled by that, and he should be looking for another, another line, another theme. Get off that. And I think AB is right. It's hard to know what the theme is at this point. You banked on the evangelicals. You got crushed in Nevada, 14 points. You're running as the most conservative candidate in a year in an electorate where people do not care about labels and ideologies. It's a personality thing. He doesn't have much of a path. I think he's hanging in there because it's been such a crazy year. You never know what's going to happen. You want to be around at the end with delegates, and maybe you can make a deal and end up. Look, Rubio and Cruz are very young. If you make a deal to be a number 2, you've got a future.
Who do you think Donald Trump would countenance the presence of either Ted Cruz or Rubio on his ticket?
No, but I think if it were Rubio Cruz, it's possible. I think that Kasich is hanging in there because he thinks he might be a good number 2.
George, is there a precedent where we've seen in recent political history where two candidates who were vying for the presidency have all of a sudden joined forces and agreed to be a ticket like that? Not even Reagan Schweiker meets that description, right?
1960. Jack Kennedy runs hard, and at the end when they got to Los Angeles Convention, bitterly against Lyndon Johnson, turned right around, and over the strenuous objection of his brother Robert Kennedy, ran with Lyndon Johnson, without whom he would not have carried and/or stolen Texas, depending on your point of view, or carried some other deep South states like South Carolina.
Where in the process did that happen, though, when Kennedy joined forces with LBJ? It was after the convention, correct, or at the convention?
At the convention.
Okay, so we're not close to the Republican convention here, right? So this would be unique if the scenario that Charles is sketching out were to come to pass, correct?
It's a unique year.
Let's ask about
Trump is a unique phenomenon.
And let's drill down on Donald Trump for a second. One of the things you heard most frequently about him before actual voting commenced was, especially after his announcement statement in which he had disparaging descriptions of Mexicans, his back and forth with Carly Fiorina, it was commonly asserted about Donald Trump that he had already alienated large segments of constituency X, which would be Hispanics, and constituency Y, which would be women, and that therefore it was now incumbent upon Mr. Trump, if he was to have any path to 270 or to the nomination, to capture some impossibly high quotient of, let's say, another constituency Z, the white male voter, what have you. Now that the results are in for some of these early states, do those early assertions deserve re-examination that Donald Trump is necessarily anathema to women or Hispanics? Jump ball.
Well, I would look at the Nevada results on the Latino vote this way. There apparently was a very large margin of error, which makes it less representative, and it was about 100 and something people, actually, all told. So he won it handily, and the sample was small, and the margin of error was big. Well, we can look, you can imagine where he brings in new voters from every group. His coalition is very broad and very durable. But when it comes to the Latino vote, I think we're going to wait a little while longer to see some more samples and more national numbers on whether or not that is really the one group of voters that Hillary Clinton can count on galvanizing. They are more organized and more angry than they were in 2012. She will not do well with millennials. She will have a tougher time with African American voters. She will have a tough time with voters across the board. A lot of Jewish voters are very unhappy with the Iran deal. But when it comes to Latino voters, that is the one group that she can count on turning out in greater numbers this time and being more energized.
Charles.
Well, there's something about the Trump phenomenon. At the beginning, before he became a phenomenon, we looked at this in conventional terms. Yes, he could have alienated Hispanics or women, but in the end, what all of these sort of over-the-top statements ended up doing is sort of getting the support of a very large constituency of people who want to see a no-nonsense candidate who isn't afraid. 77% of those whose most important attribute in South Carolina supported Trump for a guy who tells it like it is. So he gets the reputation. The content is sort of ignored. What remains is a residue of a guy who's strong, unafraid, and will kick people around in defense of the United States. There was a really interesting phenomenon at Liberty University. In the speech he made, the 2 Corinthians speech, Trump, you know, obviously is not one of them in speaking with evangelicals. But the reason I think he's done so well is in the next sentence or two, Trump said, in speaking about the attacks on Christians in the Middle East, also when speaking about how Christians are being sort of disrespected here at home, he said, I will protect Christianity. That's something you don't hear from other candidates. And the choice of the word Christianity, I thought, was curious one. But he's essentially said, I'm a defender of the faith. Yes, I'm not one of you. I don't exactly know how you quote Scripture. But you want a guy outside the gates of the cathedral who will protect you, cherish what you do, and will stand guard. And I think that's why he's had this amazing appeal. Evangelicals were not supporting the one who was nearest to them in belief and faith. They had tried that with Huckabee and Santorum. It didn't exactly get them anywhere. What they are saying is, we want a guy out there who'll protect us. If he's a Roman centurion, we don't care.
It may be the case that evangelicals are not to be considered as fundamentally different from other kinds of voting segments, and therefore they may be apt in different cycles or under different sets of circumstances to elevate issues that are not necessarily identified as their core issues to the top of their voting agenda, so that religious liberty issues such as Ted Cruz is apt to highlight might not be what is uppermost in the minds of a given evangelical voter today. It might be the economy, it might be ISIS. Just as for women, abortion rights might not be the #1 subject that they might elevate. For American Jews, it might not be Israel. Tigger TLW writes to us, if Trump gets the nomination, there will be a third-party candidate. It may even end the Republican Party. Jerry Rossman, PR, writes to us, wow, I think that's more than AB's said in a long time. So there is, at least we can identify a hunger for more A.B. Stoddard out there.
It's interesting.
In and out of the building, really. George, is Donald Trump engaged, to your eye, in a hostile takeover of the Republican Party?
Yes. If he runs and gets the nomination and runs against Hillary Clinton, she will be the most conservative person on the ballot because he so completely lacks ideological baggage. He will move to her left in quest of disaffected Sanders votes, and he'll get a number of them by promising not to reform entitlements, but to make the entitlement menu richer. He's the one who in South Carolina said every Republican candidate will cut the hell out of your Social Security. So many words. Just tarred all the Republican candidates with that. And he says, if I'm president, we're going to have a global trade war, and we're going to have economic autarky, and we're going to hunker down behind barriers and make America great behind trade barriers. And people like this, but it's completely anathema, to use your word. But it turns out anathema's charismatic this year, so it doesn't hurt him. So in that sense, yes, he will be, in 2016, the least conservative presidential candidate on the ticket. If elected, he will run for re-election, and therefore it will be until 2024 at the earliest that there could be a conservative presidential candidate.
Let's move to the Democrats, since George just raised Hillary Clinton's name. Let's, to the folks in the control room, let's play this soundbite of Hillary Clinton and Chris Cuomo of CNN.
So, will you agree to release these transcripts? They have become an issue.
Sure, if everybody does it, and that includes the Republicans, because we know they have made a lot of speeches.
You know everybody's not going to bring up their transcripts. There'll be 100 reasons why.
Why is there one standard for me and not for everybody else, Fred?
So I have a tough time imagining that the transcripts of Hillary Clinton's paid speeches to corporate groups like Goldman Sachs and others is really what she herself personally is most worried about in this particular season. And so we all talk to lots of smart people in #ThisTown. None smarter than the assembled. But what you tend to hear is a kind of a 50-50 split between those who regard the indictment of Hillary Clinton as a foregone conclusion and those who regard it as such a fantastical House of Cardsy outcome that it can't possibly come to bear. What say you?
Well, speaking to a nervous Democrat today, I was reminded that the judge's decision yesterday to force staff of Hillary Clinton and possibly Clinton herself to be questioned under oath about whether about the setting up of the server and whether it was done to subvert FOIA. We know that it was, because FOIA requests came back with nothing.
And also,
they were refused.
There was the interaction between the Executive Secretary of the Department of State and Huma Abedin 2 years into her tenure, where he said, let's start having her use a State Department BlackBerry account, parentheses, it would be responsive to FOIA, and Abedin shot back That doesn't make much sense.
So when you look at that, that's a court case. That's not the FBI investigation. There are potentially 4 executive branch investigations. One of the FBI into the classified, according to Catherine Heritage's report, which is the only one, a second track FBI investigation into potential public corruption, which would have to do with the foundation and be different. And the threshold for prosecution for public corruption is lower than it is for the classified problem. Then there are 4 congressional, then there's a State Department IG investigation and a State Department investigation, and there are 4 congressional investigations. That's a total of 8. And so, to quote this nervous Democrat who I spoke with at 2 o'clock today, the chances of her, and the court case is outside of those investigations, the chances of her skirting through all of this unscathed is 0. So you can put bets on an indictment. We know there's a lot in between, which is leaking of a report, resignations, all sorts of things. So she is very good at remaining calm and stoic and saying things like, why is there always a double standard for me? But the people around her, invested partisans who fear losing the White House for 4 or 8 years and losing the Supreme Court, are worried that they can't make it to November without something happening.
George, no more than the Supreme Court in 2000 wanted to be seen intervening in the electoral process with its decision in Bush v. Gore. We know that the FBI and the Department of Justice do not want to be seen interfering in the 2016 election process. One school of thought has it that, well, had they had anything, they would have laid out their cards by now. The opposite school of thought, this 50-50 split I alluded to earlier, is that no, it's precisely because they're being very thorough about this that they haven't just brought Hillary Clinton in for some 5-minute pro forma interview. If the Department of Justice does plan to bring a case, does the political calendar weigh on their decisions about timing? Is it more incumbent upon them to do it before the convention or after the election or what have you?
They wouldn't want to wait till after the election to bring a case against potentially a president-elect. They don't need to have an indictment. They need to have a criminal referral. If there's a criminal referral from the FBI, A, it will either be public or it will become public because someone will leak. We're back to Watergate, about which you are world's foremost authority, as far as I can tell. So all they have to do is make that referral. Doesn't matter whether it's public, doesn't matter whether the referral is acted on. If the referral is made, someone will talk.
That's tantamount to an indictment, is what you're saying.
No, I'm just saying that if the referral is made and known to have been made and nothing is done about it, that's tantamount to a presumptive cover-up.
So they can't sit on it, in other words.
It's a presumptive cover-up.
In other words, I agree with this entirely. If that happens, the scandal erupts one way or the other, and it's a scandal that will bring her down. People will resign. It'll be like the Saturday Night Massacre on a Wednesday, and it'll have a similar effect. So I think it could be fatal. And that's, look, if you're a Democrat, where do you go? You're not going to go with Sanders. That's going to be a disaster. If you go, she's the only choice, really. And yet she is under a Damocles sword because you do not know if it will come down on her. And if it does, then it's too late. Maybe you bring in a Biden if it happens within a month or 2, but even then it's hard to see it happen.
2 points here.
I think Republicans should be careful what they wish for here, because they might wind up running against someone who's a more nimble candidate with more political aptitude than Hillary has.
Does Joe Biden meet that description?
Yes.
His campaigns convince you of that?
James.
It's a low bar, and he passes it.
I also want to point out that the Democrats don't believe if it happened next weekend that they could deny Bernie Sanders the nomination. So it's actually an interesting question of timing, because the closer the convention, the more chances you can blow everything up, give her delegates to Biden and Elizabeth Warren, and sew up the matter.
The convention rules provide that the delegates to the Democratic convention have the option to switch their allegiance if they cannot, quote, in good conscience, support the candidate to whom they are bound, and nothing weighs on the conscience like a criminal indictment. But I do want to ask you, Charles, to address this more fundamental point about all of this. Is it just too fantastical and House of Cardsy to actually happen?
No. In this year, is anything too fantastic? No. Anything can happen. Anything probably will happen. And to go back to some of your other questions, that could be a reason why some of these Republicans who have no chance are staying in the race because this is a crazy year.
Because they're going to run on the Democratic ticket.
You want to be, no, for the Republican side, you want to be around in case crazy stuff really happens.
Charlotte Lady writes, has there been any further noise from Bloomberg about running? Not since there was a major poll released, I believe, yesterday, correct me if I'm wrong, AB, by Reuters, indicating very low interest amongst all segments of the Democratic electorate, or I think the general electorate, in a Bloomberg run. And Tyler Payne writes, Charles, Cruz fired someone who dishonored his campaign. It was a positive thing to do, not a mistake. So well, just consider yourself rebuked, Charles.
Look, I wasn't speaking of the moral character of this act. That would be completely irrelevant in this campaign year. I was speaking of its political effect. I think it simply highlighted a weakness and liability that he didn't have to do.
AB, just to close out, we've got just about 5 minutes left in our program here. One of our viewers was just writing that they think that Trump would be a dictator. Is that a legitimate concern? If he were to win the presidency, should we imagine that Donald Trump would conduct himself like a dictator?
I think that your question to George is this a hostile takeover of the Republican Party? I don't know that Trump set out to do anything to the Republican Party, but he sought the Republican nomination, and he's definitely well positioned to have it, the best position now. And the Republicans who want a Republican Party to thrive and want to take the presidency back believe it will be the end of the Republican Party if Trump is the nominee. Those Republicans who feel very strongly about Trump and who believe that he's not only not conservative and will run back to the center or the left, also believe that he believes in his, because of his background in business, that the job can be treated like a real estate deal, and that he can, without Constitution, court, Congress, or anything else, pretty much get what he wants. And so when he has complimented dictators and been flattered by their compliments, it has worried them, and that's part of the list of vulnerabilities that Katie Packer Gage, the Romney staffer who has spent only $3 million in this Our Principles PAC trying to go after him, it's on the list of complaints, is the fact that he has treated major national security crises with these sort of petty comments, and same with his discussion of Putin and others. So that is a concern to people who are now looking at a number of days until Super Tuesday and a winnowing opportunity to stop him, and that's, you know, that's a concern.
George, just to entertain a contrarian point of view on this, which will be charismatically anathematic to you. I'm not sure exactly how that construction goes. He was a real estate developer in New York City. He understood clearly at that time and throughout that time that he was operating in an environment in which there were other and immovable forces and interest groups and pressure blocks and actors and players that had to be navigated and in some cases appeased, whether it's trade unions or the New York City Council or public sentiment and what have you. Shouldn't we assume that Donald Trump, if he were to win the White House, would approach Washington and the business of governing in much the same way, recognizing that it's an environment in which he cannot just simply enforce his diktat on others?
Well, I think he doesn't concede that premise. He says everyone here is stupid. He's clear about that. That all our problems are simple. They will yield to willpower, and the triumph of the will is what he promises us. He promises a national police force. It's a novel conservative idea, in order to facilitate the deportation of 200,000 people a month, to get rid of 11 million people in 2 years, which he's also promised to do. He has said from now on, when you go under President Trump, when you go into a department store, they're going to say Merry Christmas. I don't know how the president does this, but it would require some kind of doubling down on the executive authoritarianism that we've experienced for the last 7 years and 1 month.
Charles, is George making a methodological mistake in seeking to assess a potential Trump presidency on the basis of the things that he said heretofore? Because this man asserts his independence not just from the establishment, but from all known conventions of political campaigning. He feels no need for Tuesday's statement to agree with Thursday's.
George's mistake is more ontological and perhaps epistemological. It's hard to say. I mean, it could be genealogical. I'd have to check his DNA. So I have no idea where George went wrong. But all I would say is we've done rather well for 250 years under a Constitution. We've had all kinds of people in the White House. And whatever Trump is saying and promising, the constraints have worked, and I think they will continue to work. So I'm not afraid of dictatorship. I'm just afraid of policies that are going to be unconservative.
I'm afraid of dictatorship, and I'm afraid of running out of time and being cut off by our producers. Wave there in the control room. Thanks to the special report team. Thanks to you for joining us. I'm James Rosen, sitting in for Brett Baer. We'll see you tomorrow, right on Special Report, 6 p.m. Eastern.